Okay, we're recording. I'm Christine Pedersen, and I'm here with Carey Page, who's a mom in the Vibrant Family group and also a registered dietitian. She's been working with kids the past couple of years, and she always has the most compassionate and really, I think, reassuring answers to questions about kids and mealtime and eating. So Carey, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be where you are.
Okay. So I have been a dietitian for 10 years now. And I work in a small hospital setting in northern Vermont, right on the Canadian border. So I see inpatients about half the time here. So people who are sick in the hospital. And then the rest of the time I see outpatients. And one of the afternoons a week, I work in the pediatrics clinic, which is very busy. And I'm always booked far out in advance. And I also have a 2.5-year-old and a 4-month-old at home. So I have that experience with feeding kids too.
Right.
Currently nursing my 4-month-old a lot.
One of the things I love about all of your answers, right, is that like, I know that you're in the trenches with meal times and food at home.
So
anyways, yeah. How has your parenthood experience like informed, or vice versa? How has your work experience informed how you parent around meals and food?
Yeah, so I think working as a dietitian before having, especially one who's eating solid foods, I would kind of talk to people about solutions to their issues and make these recommendations thinking that they could make changes all at once and have things go smoothly. And now as a parent who's gone through quite a bit too, I see that, the approaches that I recommend are kind of the ideal in a way, but it's always a process. So I always, now that I know myself, it's something that can be done in steps. And, the path towards having a kid who's not a picky eater can be a hard one. And, but I think it is possible. So I don't know if that answers it well, but
yeah,
definitely process.
I appreciate that, right? Because I feel like in terms of meal times or like kids choosing foods we would want them to choose, I want a switch to flip and make it easy, and it's just not realistic. It's it's a constant learning experience.
I talk a lot about
reassuring.
I talk with kids a lot about what changes they are willing to make, and it could be really small ones like trying a bite of a certain vegetable. Right. Sometimes the pediatricians, I think, are expecting bigger, faster changes than that, and maybe the parents are too. But for me, it's like a pretty big win when I have a kid who's willing to try something and follows through on it and feels good about trying something like that. So my steps are usually pretty small.
Well, I love that you're working with kids one-on-one, right? It's not just about disseminating information to parents who then set these expectations on kids. It's like,
right,
okay, we've got all these things we could be doing. Which things do you want to choose?
Yeah, and make the kids choose.
Yeah, that seems like a really good place to start with kids about, just saying, I'm noticing this about your eating, right? You're really limiting the foods you try. So what could we do to open the gateway to different textures, to different colors? It's so interesting. Right. Kids limit their food choices or experimentation, right?
Yeah. And we, kids do have different preferences, and we do have to honor that, to some extent. And so, it is a big deal if they're willing to try something different, and it's better to have it come from them. I think I like to give them some ideas that I have if they can't come up with any on their own. But yeah, to have their buy-in with it is important.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah.
Tell us your biggest struggles with infants. I mean, sometimes I have 8 or 9 or 10-month-old parents coming to me and saying, my child doesn't like purees or whatever. So I'd love to hear what their struggle. Well, I'll just tell you, they think their child can't sleep because they're not eating enough. So they want to get their child eating more. And I have certain limited things that I can offer them in terms of suggestions. So I'd love to hear your suggestions for infants and also for toddlers. What are the tips you feel like you're giving the most?
To be honest, I haven't seen that many infants professionally for feeding issues. I think, and personally, my daughter, my 4-month-old hasn't started solids yet, but she progressed slowly with her solid foods. And I did try what's the term? Infant-led weaning, where she was mostly trying to feed herself like chunks of really soft stuff.
Yeah.
And we had some good results with that. Just she personally seemed to really want to grab the spoon, and so it just made sense to try that approach. And then, I think the thing with infants is just kind of letting them dictate, and kids, when they're full, because they have this really great innate ability that hasn't been clouded by other things that adults take on, to know when they're hungry and when they're full. So I think just letting them take the lead, and paying attention to their cues. When they're done, they're pushing food away or pushing themselves away. I kind of personally doubt that they're not getting enough food, so to the point that it interferes with their sleep very often, because they're so good at regulating their hunger and fullness. So that's more great. Of a personal experience than a professional one. I don't think that I've had people ask me, is there a best food to start with? I don't necessarily feel like, starting with, or introducing fruits early on is going to set them up to crave sweets forever. I think there's no really right or wrong way to introduce foods, but I could send you a chart that kind of suggests amounts that are appropriate for the different infant stages. But it's not much solids that they really take in. So it's pretty slow progression. And they're still drinking quite a bit of milk or formula, and that's really their main thing. And then we call it complementary foods. It's just a small part of their intake.
Well, and I tell families that your big goal is to help kiddos get familiar with and explore new tastes and colors. And it's not to stuff their bellies with food. It's to provide them with a variety of foods, and then to make eating fun. Also working that little grasp, right? So I do encourage baby-led weaning as soon as possible, because I'm also encouraging independence, right? I want them to feel confident and empowered to get the food they need when they want it and need it, and then also to get the sleep they need when they want it and need it.
Agreed.
Okay, but toddlers are a totally different ballgame, right? I mean, then we bring in power, we bring in control, and these two things, in addition to maybe changing taste, I don't know, help us understand, changes everything about meal times with our little ones.
Yeah. Yeah. They are a whole different story. It's pretty challenging.
It is. So many parents have questions and concerns on this. This is why we're here, right? I was like, I keep giving advice about food, and then Carey steps into these awesome conversations in our group, and I'm like, oh, you're such a guide. I mean, what is it? I believe that power and control are huge players there. When you have pediatric families coming to you, what behaviors are they seeing? So maybe let's identify troublesome behaviors and then give some tips for what you'd recommend.
Yeah, so toddlers, I mostly see for picky eating behaviors. That's the big one. And I guess, distracted eating can go along with that. And then as far as my patient population, I do see a lot of like 6-year-olds and teenagers. And for them, it's mostly having to do with their weight being considered in the childhood obese category. So yeah, those are the reasons why I'm seeing them. Right. So if we're talking about toddlers with picky eating, we've talked about Ellen Satter, and I think that approach really takes the pressure off. So that is parents decide what, when, and where of when a child is going to eat, and the child decides whether they're going to eat at all and how much, and you could say which foods they're going to eat. So the idea is to take the power struggle away from meal times. If you're just preparing one meal and including at least one food that that your toddler is going to eat some of, plus milk, if that's all they eat, that one food and the milk, they're not going to starve. So you have that reassurance. And so that's the idea of that approach. And I think it's hard for parents to buy into that because they're, they get concerned their kid's going to get hungry or not gain weight or not eat a balanced diet. Yeah, but again, kids are very good at regulating what they need in terms of food. So it rarely does it. I think it works well, but it's kind of hard to get the buy-in of parents sometimes on it.
Well, I think it's hard to give up control. And
yeah,
I mean, one of the reasons that DOR, which is the Ellen Satter Institute's idea of division of responsibility, right, is that parents have certain responsibilities, kids have certain responsibilities around meal times. And how hard is it for us to just zip it and let trust? So you have mentioned this several times. You haven't used the word trust, but like your child knows when they're hungry and when they're full. And one of the hardest things to do is just to trust that they will listen to their body, and that we can give them permission to listen to their body and to be done when they're done. And we don't have to count bites. We don't have to micromanage. We don't have to control which foods on their plate they're going to eat so many bites of. And then the other big thing that I was huge into was like the bribery, right? I would use the trophy treat as the bribe for like how many pieces of broccoli you would begrudgingly nibble before you have the trophy. I don't do that anymore, right? The trophy goes right there on the plate in a very small portion that I'm fine with them eating first. And they often do. And I smile now. I love it, right? Because I know that I trust them. We've been doing this long enough that I know they're going to eat an acceptable amount of the rest of their food. But it's really reassuring to hear that this is something that you guys are practicing in your industry, and that you encourage parents to do.
I think there's some other ways to kind of set your child up so that they are willing to try new things. So one of the biggest things I make sure that parents are trying to do is having planned meal times. So, you know, setting things up every 2 to 3 hours, you know, preparing a snack that's filling, including a protein or a fat with it.
Right.
And then only allowing water between meals, because you want them to show up at the table hungry.
Okay.
Not like a 10 out of 10 hungry, but maybe like a 7 out of 10 hungry. You
right.
don't
That's just
need
like
to
sleep.
starve them.
Yeah.
But you want to definitely avoid letting them graze, because if they've even had a snack, you know, an hour before dinner, you may have affected their appetite enough so that, you know, they're not as hungry and not as willing to try new things. So it is really interesting to kind of experiment with that and see how it affects like my 2.5-year-old. Whenever I'm watching her, not to place blame on other people, but she's cut off from snacks at 3, you know, that's her snack time. And then we have dinner at 5:30 or 6. And when I do it that way, she always comes to the table and sits down and eats, maybe not everything that I've put on her plate. You know, she doesn't always clear her plate, but she's much more likely to eat what I have served. And she's a vegetarian and we aren't. And that's her choice, which is interesting. She ate meat until she was 1 year old, and then she just decided she didn't like it anymore, but she loves tofu and eggs and beans. And so, you know, I accept that about her, and I prepare vegetarian options most nights of the week. We eat vegetarian, but anyway, so if she's hungry, she comes to the table, sits down, and eats her food. It makes all the difference. It really does, to make sure that that they're not grazing too much, basically.
We are really successful with that throughout the day until about 3. And then
yeah, it's hard.
Just like demand food or be like, I'm so hungry so we bump dinner to 4:30. So they get an after school snack, and then I start preparing dinner between 4:30 and 5, because if they don't eat a whole meal with all the fixings, it's literally like goldfish crackers until mealtime. And I did notice that we are all so much happier if we just get our large meal at 4:30, and then we might have a bedtime snack.
Yeah. Totally.
But that for us is so much easier than like trying to keep them from asking for, I mean, clearly they are hungry and they will eat so much.
Yeah.
I think they just haven't listened to their body all day long, right? They've either been at childcare in school and they're coming home and they're finally like, oh, I'm listening to my body.
And that's fine. I think if that works, then it sounds like it's working really well. We do early dinner too. It's just kind of when my toddler is hungry and ready to eat. And otherwise I usually let her watch her favorite show while I'm cooking dinner, so that kind of distracts her for a half an hour while I'm you know, she's not asking for food during that time, so that's kind of helpful for me. But
right.
So that's I would say the biggest thing is, you know, having them come to the table hungry and serving new foods in small amounts next to foods that they're comfortable with, or that you know that they're going to be willing to try. Not pressuring them to try anything, just kind of, like you said, taking a step back, kind of zip it and watch and see what they do. It's interesting. Just take a kind of a more curious standpoint. And you want to, I recommend that people not be rewarding behaviors with treats. Anytime you kind of set that up as a reward, or alternatively set it up as off limits, it just becomes like this super desirable thing that they want even more.
And that's not just for kids.
Yeah,
that's for adults too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you want to allow yourself and your kids to have treats, and enjoy them.
I'm curious too. So we've started in our house. I've been doing intuitive eating for the last several years, and my husband just this morning used the word play food, which I try to use with my kids instead of treats or dessert. No one else in our community uses it. So childcare providers, grandparents, like they're all still using desserts or treats. But my husband this morning, I felt like it was a huge win. He was like, I feel I let them eat like Kicks or Checks for cereal. And he was like, this is just air. I feel like this is more play food. So we're having this interesting discussion this morning. And I was really excited that now everyone in our household uses play food as opposed to desserts or treats. What do you refer to play food as? Like food that's not necessarily nutritious, highly nutritious, but we're not shaming kids for eating.
Yeah, we call it fun food. I think it could be anything. It's not necessarily sweets. It could be whatever you really enjoy that is for some people might be considered less nutritious. I try to also, get people away from labeling foods as good or bad or healthy or unhealthy, trying to use a little bit more neutral language. You're teaching your kids this stuff. So, not labeling things as good or bad takes away that feeling of shame when you eat something bad. All foods really do have some redeeming qualities. Soda is kind of questionable, but so I think, encouraging people to develop a healthy relationship with things like chocolate and chips and all of that, and have it on a regular basis so that it's not so off limits and you enjoy it and don't feel bad about it. And then it takes away that sometimes constant craving for it that people have when they put it off limits. So we have treats every day, or fun food.
Oh yeah, fun food every day. In fact, it's my birthday today, and I woke up this morning.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. I told my husband, we're gonna eat cake for every meal, and the kids were like, really? And I was like, no, I'm kidding. But on your birthday, you can start. We always start with like whipped cream on pancakes and a candle.
Nice.
For the but they love that. They were like, we get cake for every meal of the day. And years ago, I would never have thought about that. I was very controlling about the types of foods we gave to our kids. I felt a lot of shame if they ate too much sugar or too many processed foods at school. And now I'm like, I feel really, really good about freedom. Like the freedom to choose, the freedom to try, and not shaming or tainting foods because of their ingredients or how they were made. It feels a lot better to me. And what I've learned over the years of shifting my philosophy, because I don't know, I feel like we grew up in a generation with parents who had like really weird ideas about good and bad foods. And what we're finding in the data is like the trans fats we were eating in margarine weren't necessarily the greatest, but there was a very like low fat, no fat generation that I sort of grew up in.
Me too.
and that like did something
in your brain.
To my mind. Yes. Allowing myself to eat highly fatty and nutritious food like an avocado felt like I was breaking some rule. Right. So when we talk about kids and setting them up for healthy eating habits, I think that that's the key right there. They're releasing them from shame of their cravings. And when I say healthy, I mean not disordered, right? And that's my last question for you. How do we set up our kids in these early years, their infant stages, their toddler stages, when they're wanting the power to feed themselves, right? That's the time we start sowing the seeds of healthy eating and not disordered eating. So we don't end up with bingers. We don't end up with people who are depriving themselves of nutrients
Right.
and sustenance, right?
Yeah, right. I think, one thing is how showing them a healthy relationship with food yourself, as I said, kind of watching the language that you use with good and bad food, even saying like junk food.
Yep.
So changing kind of the language that you use, maybe the way that you talk about your own self and your body, that comes up a lot. I think we see patterns of parents who are, talking about how they need to lose weight, or how they don't like how they look. And that really easily gets passed along to kids. Like, oh, if mom thinks that her belly is fat, then, mine must be too. And so being aware, very aware and careful with that is important. So I always encourage that. It's, and, again, just trying to continue to get kids to be paying attention to when they're hungry and when they're full, and maintain that ability. We kind of tend to lose it as we get older. Other things get in the way. But the more you can kind of sit down and think about, how hungry am I right now? And then take your time without distractions as much as you can when you're eating, so that you fully enjoy your meal, have it be a very enjoyable experience to eat. It's supposed to be. Feel good about it. If you're going to eat chocolate cake, then enjoy every bite of it and not feel guilty. And then you'll tend to be able to get that signal from your gut to your brain that I'm full, and pay attention to that too, so that you're enjoying food and knowing your body well, I think. So yeah, the disordered eating thing is something to watch out for sure, and to start thinking about kind of early on with kids, because there's restricting eating, and then there's binge eating, and all these behaviors can kind of develop at a young age. So I think we as parents just have to be really good models ourselves.
Oh, that hits hard, right? I think about how happy I am to have changed the story, right, from my past, and and to be moving forward with those two things in mind. So I want to finish today with just recapping the idea of trust. So we as parents get to trust our kids. Trusting ourselves in food is actually hard. That takes a lot more work. But your kids were born intuitive eaters, right? So trusting them to know when they're hungry, when they're full, what sounds good to their bodies, what doesn't sound good that day. Those are really great tools for helping them have a love of food. And then the emotional aspects of eating, which are huge. So we're just talking about like the physical aspect of putting food in their mouth, right? But there's this whole underlying emotional world going on for them, where they're sensing our baggage about food, about our body image, about what we're accepting into ourselves, what we're rejecting, and they take that in and start shaming themselves.
Right.
And I think, the biggest takeaway for me in this conversation is, and as you were talking, I was like, hate eating. Like, we sit down with a plate of food that is supposed to be a joyful experience.
Yeah.
Right? We're supposed to be smelling it and tasting it and like slowly allowing ourselves to enjoy this incredible gift that we have in like food. Like, we were given these senses so that we could enjoy it, right? And yet in so many times, myself as a parent, I'm like, shoveling food in my mouth because I'm in a race with my kids to see who's going to finish first, and we got to move on to the next part of our evening, or I'm distracted by something else. And it's like, if you're distractedly eating or shame eating or hate eating your meal because you haven't set yourself up to enjoy it, that's setting you up for disordered eating for sure.
Right.
Because you are not registering in your brain, this is a beautiful moment for myself, I'm going to honor it. And you're certainly not registering in your body, like, this is something I deserve to do slowly and listen to when I'm full, and then I get to stop.
Right.
Or keep going, right?
Right. Or keep going.
Yeah. But those messages, I think, are turned off when there's shame, and I don't know where it comes from, right? But all this baggage from our past, from society, from culture, maybe even from our healthcare providers about what we should
look like. There's a lot behind it all, you know. We all have a lot of history. Food and eating can be a really emotional thing, so it's understandable.
I got teared up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about like the way we talk to our kids about our bodies, affects how they see themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's a big one for little kids.
Right? I mean,
it's hard to see little kids who are feeling upset about, you know, thinking that they're too fat, or that whole mindset is just kind of heartbreaking. So we definitely, as parents, need to be not perpetuating that by, you know, talking about ourselves that way. Yeah,
they're going to get it from society.
Right.
Enough, right? Well, and I think of even people with the healthiest bodies that are considered most attractive by society standards. And, you know, even people walking around in those shoes are feeling ashamed of themselves in some way. Like, we have, it's so easy for us to become trapped in this never good enough, right? People who feel like they need to gain weight because they don't fit into some standard. So yeah, as a mindful parenting educator, my hope is for parents to be a little bit more conscious about their relationship to food, how they communicate that to their kiddos.
Yep.
And then also allowing their kiddos to just embrace the fun of food and eating and take the pressure off trying new things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it's a process, you know, it takes some time to make these changes if you've been doing things a little differently. So being patient with that process too.
Yes. So being patient with yourself, being patient with your kids, but also starting as soon as you can.
Yeah.
Making those shifts, right? Like today, everybody. Go out and notice how you can start making these shifts around food. And I felt like for me, there was a cascading effect. So I was like, oh, this is something that's unhelpful for me. And then I just kept peeling back more and more layers. That felt so good to get rid of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's a layer I don't need. Oh, another layer I don't need. I'm going to just get rid of it.
Good.
Also, Carey, you are such a gem. I am.
Thanks. You are too.
I'm such a.
I've appreciated your help so much.
Well, yeah, I will continue to use you as a resource when we have questions about nutrition come up in the group. But I'm really happy to share this resource for parents who are, you know, worried about their kids' health and relationship to food. And the beautiful thing is, like mindful parenting, I think eating in this way with DOR and division of responsibility, it's actually easier.
Yeah, it is.
Most parents are doing.
Yeah, way easier. That's another good point.
And healthier.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's a win-win for sure.
Okay.
Yay. Have a great day at work. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day.
That's part of my day. Happy birthday.
Good. Yeah, I know. I was actually really excited that we get to spend a birthday together.
Okay.
Yay.
Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye, Carey.